The Naim Uniti Nova PE is one of the most musically involving amps I've heard in a long time, primarily because of how it paces the music. Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Michael Johnson, and what I have with me here today is the most powerful Naim integrated amplifier in modern history. It has a lot of that traditional Naim formula with a few distinctive new twists. Come along with me as I take you through what the new Naim Uniti Nova Power Edition has to offer. Naim's Uniti Nova integrated amplifier debuted about 5 years ago, and it built upon the success of Naim's line of all-in-one streaming amplifiers with an 80 watt per channel Class AB amplifier section, very much similar to amplifiers found in Naim's more traditional integrateds like the Super Nate series. But the Uniti Nova's philosophy is very clear. It wants to be your one and only device. All you need to do is add speakers. Now in 2024, Naim have released a new Nova and dubbed it the Uniti Nova Power Edition. This new Power Edition keeps the feature set from the successful Nova, but changes out the 80 watt per channel Class AB amplifier for a nearly double 150 watt per channel Class D amplifier. A first for the company. They've also increased the price to an eye-watering $10,000, pushing this amplifier into a price territory occupied more by separate components than by integrateds. Aside from that, the formula is largely similar between this and the previous Uniti Nova, but we can review. The Nova Power Edition, aka the Nova PE, is a streaming amplifier with a built-in Burr Brown DAC, its own mobile and computer app, and integration with streaming services such as Qobuz, Tidal, and Spotify. If you want to stream outside of the Naim ecosystem, the Nova PE is also compatible with Roon. It's Roon ready. It accepts Apple AirPlay 2, Bluetooth, Chromecast, and your UPnP app of choice. The chassis of the Nova PE is compact but incredibly stylish and very heavy for its size at over 33 pounds. It's not a particularly big amplifier, and everything on it feels very metallic. It's a decidedly contemporary design that almost looks like it would be something out of a Frank Lloyd Wright sketchbook if you were to kind of ignore the brushed black metallic finish. I'm well aware that looks don't impact sound quality or usability, but I do have to point out that Naim are one of the more mainstream audio brands out there, and they're really trying to push their products to markets that are beyond the traditional hi-fi buyer. For that, I think they're smart to pursue an emphasis on design language. The Nova PE, it just looks good. With its overlit Naim logo right here and 5-inch digital display and oversized volume knob on the top, and the really solid side heat sinks, it just has sharp angles throughout, and it's a pleasure to kind of be around. Let's talk a little bit about that volume knob. It's by far one of the best in this class. It's very satisfying to interact with, smooth to operate, and uses a smartly integrated set of LED volume bars to visually track where you are on the volume clock. Its gain curve is well balanced. It's not too sensitive, but not so mild that you have to spin the knob forever just to get the listening levels that you want. And that's one of the few complaints I have about my very similarly spec'd Hagel H390 integrated. I feel like I just have to turn the volume knob forever on that to get to normal listening levels. I said before that the Nova PE wants to be the one and only device on your rack, and the rear connectivity does demonstrate that philosophy. Connections are incredibly limited, as Naim includes a full suite of digital playback solutions on the app. They are, however, kind enough to bless us with 4 analog inputs, 2 of which are RCA, while the other 2 may look like balanced connections, but they're actually Naim's signature 5-pin stereo DIN connection. Because, of course, they want you to connect the Nova PE with other Naim boxes like the NVC Phonostage or the CD5SI. If you have a source that excels through its balanced connection, like for instance my DAC, my Denafrips Pontus 2, you're out of luck. You need to use an RCA connection, or if your device only has balanced outputs, you need to use an adapter. That may be disappointing for some, but remember, this is meant to be an all-in-one box. What's additionally fascinating about the analog connections on the Nova PE is that they're actually not analog. The Nova PE doesn't just have a built-in DAC, but also an analog to digital converter that converts every single analog input on this device into a 48 kilohertz digital signal. This is actually a feature intended to enhance compatibility with Naim's multi-room functionality, which allows the Nova PE to connect with other Naim products throughout the same household network, all controlled via the Naim app. The digital connectivity of this amp is served by two optical Toslink connections, two coaxial RCA connections, one BNC, and one HDMI ARC connection for connecting to your TV or home theater. Notably, while the DAC in the Nova PE can handle up to 32-bit 384 kilohertz PCM or go up to DSD 128, the connections provided on this amplifier can only service PCM up to 192.24 with no DSD capabilities. The reason for this is that those codecs require either a USB or I2S connection, which Naim does not include. The USB-A connection on the rear and also on the front is not a digital audio connection. That's typically going to be USB-B, but rather this connection is a file server connection, allowing you to plug in a hard drive like a USB flash drive or a solid state drive to play files, again, via the Naim app. This was kind of disappointing. I couldn't directly connect my new reference streamer, the Inuos Zenith Mark III, as that streamer only has a digital USB out connection. And try as I might, through the USB-A on the Naim, it did not work because it's not built for that. If I wanted to listen to the Zenith, I had to run that streamer to my Denafrips Pontus 2, which I had to then run back to the analog RCA connections of the Nova PE, which would then convert the analog signal just converted by my Denafrips back to a 48 kilohertz digital signal, which would then be converted back to the analog outputs of the speaker taps to my Harbeth speakers. And I should mention that the speaker taps on this Naim integrated are not traditional binding posts, but rather Naim's banana-only connections. So if you have connections like Spade on your speaker cables, you're out of luck and will have to purchase an adapter. The lack of four-way binding posts does also limit options for subwoofer connections. Many audiophiles, myself included, like to connect our REL subs via their high-level connection, which draws signal from the speaker taps instead of like a preamp output. This is not possible for me with this amplifier because of these banana-only speaker plugs, and I did have to use one channel of the preamp output to run to my REL T7X subwoofer. Listen, the connectivity hurdles may seem less than ideal to those of us with large multi-component systems like what I have, but I'm not going to drag Naim for those choices. This amplifier is not necessarily for us. This is, again, meant to be a one-box solution, and the point of an amplifier like this is not to have to connect a million devices. All you really need with this is a Wi-Fi connection and speakers, and you have a system. The Nova PE does have an Ethernet input for maximum latency, but the modern reality is that it's not always feasible to run Ethernet to your system, so it has Wi-Fi capabilities, and that's a huge bonus for simplicity and ease of use for those not hardcore enough to do what I did, which is run a 50-foot Ethernet cable across half of your apartment just to be able to stream music. The front face of the Nova PE has two further connections I mentioned before, one further USB-A and a 3.5 millimeter headphone jack. Why a 3.5 millimeter jack when a traditional hi-fi jack is going to be a 1/4 inch? Because this is once again about simplicity and convenience. And the portable lightweight headphones a lot of all-in-one buyers are going to have is going to be that 3.5 millimeter connection. I don't think this is about converting traditional home headphone users into Naim's ecosystem, but rather I think this choice is about converting the Bluetooth using Lightning to aux connecting masses to a more hi-fi solution. And in that regard, I think it's smart. But the big news in the Nova PE is its power amplifier, because this is the first time that I can remember that Naim have applied Class D technology to its amplifiers. Naim worked with a longtime Class D amplifier designer, Purify, to come up with this amp section of this unit. Now, nobody has ever claimed that Naim amps weren't powerful before. Their watt per channel ratings were always considered conservative by almost every commentator and reviewer, and the 80 watts available in the original Nova were very clearly nothing to scoff at. But if you're going to take the numbers on this at their word, this new Nova PE has expanded the power horizons of this British company. The specs are impressive. We get 150 watts per channel into 8 ohms and 250 watts per channel into 4 ohms, meaning there is a substantial amount of current in this amplifier. and it's going to have no trouble driving even low impedance floor standards. Now, let's talk a little bit about functionality. The 5-inch digital display on the front face is clear and sharp, but it isn't a touchscreen. Control this amplifier is handled one of 3 ways. Via the 4 buttons on the front face here, which are power, play, pause, source select, and a starred favorites button. They're also handled via the remote control here, which is very sleek and backlit, or they're handled via the Focal and Naim app, which was available on both iPhone and the Apple Store with my MacBook Pro. The front controls on the amplifier do feel a little incomplete. I was a little bit frustrated that I could only scroll forwards through the sources, and if I missed my selection, I had to go back through the whole list all over again. The remote is a lot better in that regard, and it features a more complete control screen. However, to get true functionality and customizability, you really do have to use the app, which is either going to be a 0.4 or against the Nova PE, depending on how you like to interact with your music playback. The Naim app is not quite as fully fleshed out as a solution like Roon, but it is well enough designed and very easy to use. The main benefit of this app, besides being your streaming controller, is that it is actually where you get to control most of the settings on the device. To get started, I connected my Nova PE to my longtime reference bookshelf speakers, the Harbeth 30.2 XD, via a pair of Kimber Cable 12TC speaker cables that were luckily terminated with banana plugs. I ran the unit with the mighty AudioQuest Thunder power cable, which might be overkill, but I ran that directly into the wall socket. Naim have proclaimed and priced this amplifier with the idea that it can deliver a lot of serious power, and I just didn't want anything choking its ability to show me that. After a prolonged break-in period spent playing mostly Apple Music between Apple AirPlay, mostly in the background, I did sit down to do some more critical style listening. I dove into the Naim app mostly via its integrated Qobuz feature, which is where I was able to see my entire library of favorites on Qobuz through the app itself. I was also treated to the album artwork displayed on the Nova PE's front screen, it did make it more enjoyable to stream. I started with a high-resolution mastering of Herbie Hancock's 1965 album, Maiden Voyage. Maiden Voyage is not an overly complex recording, but right away I could tell the Nova PE was pumping really serious energy through my Harbeths. The horn lines of Freddie Hubbard and George Coleman, which open the title track, sounded very distinct with an excellent separation and a great sense of air and texture on each instrument. Tony Williams' drums didn't sound particularly oversized like I've heard in some really, really high-powered amplifiers, but what the Naim did do was imbue them with a really incredible sense of tangible attack and rhythmic drive. In fact, when I was listening to the musicians take their turns throughout the opening title track, there was a real sense that all the players were kind of like leaning into the rhythm. The Naim Uniti Nova PE was imparting an incredible sense of energy and connectedness with this session. Dynamic attacks, especially on the Eye of the Hurricane, were really jarring, and the rendering of Hancock's piano had a really brilliant bite and sparkle when it needed, but it didn't overemphasize its place when he was trying to kind of lay back with the rest of the band. The only sort of confusing thing that I noted was that Ron Carter's bass notes, particularly on Survival of the Fittest, that tune, were not quite as full-bodied and extended as I do remember hearing in prior listens. I went back and plugged in my reference integrated, which is the Hegel H390, which I have down here. While I know it's been replaced with the new H400, the H390 did recently retail for around $6,000, which is not as expensive as the Nova PE, but it does have a similar power figure. The Hegel also lacks a lot of the built-in features of the Naim, but streamed via the same Qobuz file to my Inuo Zenith, then directly into the USB input of the H390. I heard a lot more fleshed out bass from Carter, with more impact from him as well as from the kick drum of the kit, which to me this just confirms something I've known about Hegel for a long time, in that they do have kind of a magic formula for their bass control. Some say it's high damping factor, some attribute it to other things with the power amplifier design, but other areas with the Hegel weren't as much of a slam dunk. For instance, the cymbals sound far more intense and immediate on the Uniti Nova PE, and I think your preference is really going to come down to what kind of sonic signature you prefer, because I think both presentations definitely have their merits. The somewhat more high-octane presentation of the Nova PE excited me, and I wanted to play something a little heavier, so I put on Mastodon's 2006 heavy metal concept album, Blood Mountain. The opening track on this, The Wolf is Loose, begins with a really pummeling, fast drum fill by Brandaler. One that I felt more intense through the name, particularly the snare drum had this kind of metallic snap to it that really portrayed the energy and ferocity of likely how it was actually being played. The name was also really good at unraveling the subtle vocal overdubs and layering I never really paid attention to before on this album. The guitar solo by Brett Hins on Crystal Skull was brilliant. Its rendering of the upper frequency in air had this present mid-range tone to it. Further present was this forward energy that made the playthrough of this song seem more engaging. The name seems to excel particularly at rhythm and timing. We sometimes call this phenomenon in audio Pratt. It provides the music with is it cliche if I say toe tapping? It's a toe tapping quality. It keeps your attention a lot better than most. On this album, I did find low bass to be a little more impressive here, particularly in the sub bass. There's a sub bass on the kick drum that maybe it was added as a studio effect, but I could really hear it through the name Unity Nova PE. I was wanting for a little bit more of that mid bass punch, as I felt the emphasis on the low bass made the drums feel slightly separated from the guitars and vocals, which did disrupt a bit of the staging coherence for me. But that might have been recording dependent, and to find out how recording dependent what I was hearing was, I switched to an album called Impulse by some of my favorite Austin indie rockers' boyfriends. They have this track Hiatus, and on it I was treated to a much more open soundstage with a rhythm section that felt a little bit further back in the mix than the one that was provided to me when I was listening to Mastodon, where everything felt a little bit pushed to the front. Here on this recording, the synchronization between the bass guitar and the drums, it was just spot on. And the groove between the two instruments was very pleasing and intoxicating. The vocals by the guitarist Scott Martin have this kind of intentional washed out effect, but really only through the name did I actually hear a little bit of a room and a space around the vocal reverb, which before just felt like an effect to me. Where often I would listen to this track and hear only kind of this voice floating in space, I could actually kind of place it listening on this amplifier. The Nova PE, so far it's very clear the Nova PE can portray a really great energy, but it's really also excellent at unraveling subtle studio details present in a recording. I was noticing that all over listening to this album. I was hearing all the little studio tricks that were done. I think a lot of people would describe a presentation like this is offering something that's very off the board, like almost off the mixing board. The guitar sound in the following track, Little Secret, was menacing, eerie. It had this incredible upper frequency texture. Martin's guitar is fed through some type of octave effect box, and to be able to hear each tone in that effect, like this fuzzed out harmonic sequence of this melody, it was really, really cool. I was able to hyperfixate on little details like this all throughout my listening session, and it provided a very immense experience, especially for recordings that do have a lot of studio overdubs, maybe stuff that was recorded on 24-track tape or that has dense production. I wanted to take kind of a step back from overwhelming detail and listen to a recording that focused more on like things like tone and space. For that, I played a high-res stream of Alexander Throud's 2019 album Versailles, recorded at Salle Cologne in Paris. This is a beautiful recording of late 17th and early 18th century short keyboard pieces played by Throud on a modern grand piano, which is something not exactly in fashion in this modern age where everyone's focused on period instrument performance. But Throud's attention to stylistic detail in these performances, I think, makes you forget all about those concerns. In his performance of the piece Call of the Birds by one of my favorite French composers, Jean-Philippe Rameau, the Unity Nova PE presents dynamics, even subtle ones, with a ton of finesse. All the little inflections of the phrase that usually get lost in recorded playback of delicate music like this come through beautifully through this amplifier. Admittedly, I will say I think the presentation is a little upfront, and that was a running theme I did find across my time with the Nova. That what it sacrificed in depth of stage, though, it made up for in really nice portrayal of fine detail, and again, rhythm, pacing, and this separation of musical lines that allows you to kind of hyper-focus on things. Now, I did switch over to Naim's built-in headphone amplifier, that little 3.5 millimeter jack here, and much of that character remained when played back through my reference headphones, which are the Focal Clear open back. Despite the size of the jack used, Naim have never really treated their headphone sections as an afterthought. They're a dominant feature of a lot of their integrated designs, and you should not underestimate this headphone amplifier. You will do so at your own peril. I was definitely not one to be satisfied with just streaming, so even though this is a digital amplifier, I decided to hear how this amplifier tackled vinyl, again, even through this digital lens. I hooked up my Pure Fidelity Horizon turntable with my Hana Umami Red cartridge, and I drove that through my Alnic H1202 tube phono stage, and I did that right into the RCA input of the Nova PE. I pulled out my Analog Productions 45 RPM cut of Phil Collins' debut solo album, Face Value. In the Air Tonight might be a meme at this point in our collective culture, but it's a fantastic song that highlights everything about Collins' songwriting, including his incredible use of harmonized vocal tracks that through the name are distinct and rich and spacious. Are they as spacious and rich as what my Hagel H390 can do? No, but the difference is the Hagel cannot etch the individual lines, especially the individual vocal lines, as well as the name. The amplifiers have different strengths. One thing is for certain, when the drums come in at the climactic end of In the Air Tonight, the Nova PE provided that really invigorating, moving energy that simply, it just made me smile. This is a fun song to listen to, and the name made it fun. For a record with even more energy than the Phil Collins, I played this 1985 cult electro-funk classic by Toshiki Katamatsu called Gold Digger with True Love. Katamatsu was one of the city pop kings of the early 80s. He produced albums for a number of large pop stars in Japan, but he also had a really successful and prolific solo career. A lot of his previous albums mixed funk guitars and a big live horn section and all these kind of like West Coast soul features, but Gold Digger was his first big step into serious like synthesizer programming and digital audio effects. And the inventive new technology he was using mixed with his traditional accompaniment of saxophones and trumpet solos and choral vocals make for a really eclectic and all over the place listen. Playing the opening samples on the first track, I Can't Stop the Night, the upper mid bass, this time really was present and punchy and kind of like hit me in the gut a little bit. It's a track with a lot of transient slam, and the name provided that very well. I will say that this is not an amp, though, that you can listen to all day and night without any fatigue. It's a really exciting rhythmic presentation, but that does have some drawbacks because it just does give you a little fatigue for listening really long periods. But if you're listening to music on your hi-fi the entire day, either you're a reviewer or you should probably take a break, go outside, and talk to a real human being because your loved ones might be worried about you and you should call them. Not wanting to limit my my record selections to cheesy 80s pop entirely, I wanted to pull out something that was a little more complex, and so I pulled out some orchestral music. I had just gotten this exciting new box set in Deutsche Gramophone's analog remastered box set edition of Herbert von Karajan's complete cycle of Bruckner symphony recordings with the Berlin Philharmonic. So, to produce this set, Rainer Maillard and the team at Emil Berliner Studios built an 8-track passive mixer to cut the 8-track analog master tapes directly to the lathe in real time. And here I was about to play these pristine, all analog records through a digital amplifier because science. The first record from the set that I played was the third movement of Bruckner's Fourth Symphony, the famous Hunting Scherzo. It's a very energetic and powerful symphonic movement. And I got probably 45 seconds in and something went horribly wrong. Whenever a dynamic climax appeared in this music, all of a sudden I got this incessant clicking sound, this like digital clicking sound that came over my speakers. Initially, I thought this was a pressing defect. I thought there was something cut into the record that was causing it to distort in dynamic sections. But I then went and played the rest of the set in other records in the cycle that had dynamic moments and the same distortion happening. So, and it wasn't just on that record. It was also, you know, it could, like, the things that were going through my head were that, is this causing the amp to clip into my speakers? But that would have been a much more loud and jarring and damaging sensation. So it wasn't amplifier clipping. Eventually, I went back and I played these records on my Hagel H390 and also directly from my phono stage to my headphone amplifier, which is the Icon HP8. And the problem went away. So it was something to do with the Nova PE. Something was causing this music to distort with digital artifacts when played through this amplifier. So I shot a very quick and frantic email off to the team at Focal Naim, and they got back to me right away, and they suspected that this clipping was actually from the input stage of the preamplifier section. Fortunately, this amplifier is very customizable, and they thought the fix was just to change the input voltage. Many of the amplifier settings, including input voltage, are actually adjustable through the Naim Focal app. Changing the input sensitivity from 2.5 volts, which is the default and it's labeled as hi-fi, to 6.5 volts, labeled studio, that completely fixed the problem. I did have to turn up the volume more to get my desired listening levels, but even doing that at the same listening level, the sound was absolutely free of all the issues I mentioned before. The clipping was gone, the distortion was gone, and the problem was solved. Once that issue was fixed, I was free to immerse myself in the burnished brass of the Berlin Philharmonic. The orchestra, when played through the Nova PE, was powerful and in control. It had musical lines easily untangled through this amplifier because of its resolving qualities. Transient critical instruments like timpani and bowed strings came through with this open and unencumbered sound. I especially enjoyed actually hearing the lines of the Berlin Philharmonic woodwind section, which often sound buried in their recordings because Karajan really did not care for woodwind sound in his concept of orchestral color. So hearing the Berlin Phil woodwinds, it means you've got either a very insightful mixing mastering or also a very, very insightful amplifier, and I think I had both here. The hall this was recorded in, which is Jesus Christi Kirche in Berlin, is never a sonic marvel, but this new remastering does do a really good job at giving the orchestra a space to inhabit. I did want a bit for the rear sections of the orchestra to sound a little bit more distant from the front, a more sense of rear space. But I realized that's just not a highlight of the Naim sound, which, despite having incredible detail, to me is really more about energy and feeling. This amp is a great example that existing slightly on the brighter side of neutral, it doesn't mean a piece of equipment is cold or uninvolving. In fact, I think the opposite is true. The Naim Uniti Nova PE is one of the most musically involving amps I've heard in a long time, primarily because of how it paces the music. So at the end of this review, I have to admit to myself that the Uniti Nova PE is not an amplifier for me. And that's okay, because it's actually an incredible amplifier, and it will be an incredible amplifier for a lot of people. I am okay admitting I'm not the common consumer. Hell, I'm not even the common hi-fi buyer. Not everyone wants or needs a rack full of separate components. Not everyone has a strong preference for analog playback, and not everyone needs unlimited connectivity for a rotating cast of review pieces that I have all around me. For those that want a great sounding, toe-tapping, stylish, great-looking piece of hi-fi kit that can go on any shelf, table, or desk, and only needs a pair of speakers to deliver its full potential, the Naim Uniti Nova Power Edition is absolutely for you. And it's one of a growing number of these kind of full-featured Cadillac streaming amplifiers that do solve a lot of problems without a lot of clutter. If your music playback system is focused around streaming and you love a sound signature that radiates energy and prat, this is one amplifier I think you really do have to hear. And with Naim's adoption of this new Class D amplifier section, You compare this with virtually any speaker in and around his price class, and you're not going to have any fear of running out of gas. But those are just my thoughts, and we'd love to hear yours. Please leave a comment down below. If you liked the review, please give us a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe so that more hi-fi content just like this gets delivered right into your feed. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time.